Sorry, there's this other video about abortion that I just had to respond to because it's a new argument that we haven't really fully talked about yet. So let's roll the clip and see what juicy content we have today.
Well, folks, I've seen a lot of bad arguments for abortion in my time, but the LA Times has released a really solidly bad argument for abortion. This comic shows, for those who can't see, a chart of maternal mortality. Quote, in the U.S., pregnant people die of pregnancy-related causes at a higher rate than police die in the line of duty. This piece, again, titled, What if abortion were self-defense? So the idea is that people who are pregnant are at a higher risk than people who are police officers. Okay, so number one, police officers are being targeted by criminals. Women who die are not being targeted by their babies.
This statistic is to give an idea on the rate of death amongst women due to pregnancy-related causes. It's not meant to be a competition, but it will eventually shed light on another argument later. Plus, you mentioning that police officers are being targeted by criminals only works against your own point. Pregnant women in the US are suffering so much from pregnancy-related issues that their death rates are higher than a job where you are actively being targeted by people who are breaking the law. That just goes to show how bad pregnancy actually is, and with abortion laws becoming more and more strict, this number is going to go up due to abortion and maternal health care being two sides of the same coin.
Women who die with relation to maternal mortality very often have other conditions that are exacerbated by pregnancy. Maternal mortality tends to congregate in women who have previous medical conditions, who have high levels of obesity, for example.
You're not wrong that having another condition irrelevant to pregnancy could exacerbate the condition. However, pregnancy itself is still incredibly dangerous. Don't ask me why evolution allowed this, but mammals in general have very dangerous childbirths and pregnancies, usually involving lots of suffering and lots of death. Humans are no exception, but luckily we have developed medicine to the point where pregnancy has become safer. But that doesn't mean it's still not dangerous. It absolutely still is, which is why maternal health care is important. We essentially have the tools to better the lives of women and are choosing not to make it available, just because one of the many procedures could involve abortion. Abortion is tied to maternal health care. There's absolutely no denying that. But when you restrict abortion, you're also restricting maternal health care in general because OBGYN doctors, being afraid of prosecution, end up not working in areas where abortion laws are stricter. And this causes an overall decrease in access to maternal health care, which causes a shortage of important procedures such as cancer screenings. It's because we're restricting abortions that women in general are getting worse treatment, which contributes to death both related to and unrelated to pregnancy complications. The graph comparing that to police officers is just a showcase on how badly it has gotten, and it's only going to increase if we continue to deny women this important medical procedure.
The actual rate, I should mention here, of maternal mortality is 1 woman per 3,040 live births dies of maternity-related causes.
And that is one too many. The number of maternity deaths have only increased over the last few years. And of course, there are many reasons for this, from discrimination to wealth inequality to restrictions to abortion access.
Okay, but notice where this goes next. Quote, the U.S. has the highest maternal mortality rate of any developed nation and is the only developed nation in which maternal mortality is rising. Okay, so there's a reason for that. The reason is that the United States actually measures births differently and maternal mortality differently. So in European countries, they just don't count certain births as births. Like if a baby dies very quickly, they don't count it as a maternal mortality. There's an actual difference in the counting statistics with regards to maternal mortality in the United States as opposed to other places.
What in the actual fuck are you talking about? Let me just roll that tape again.
They just don't count certain births as births. Like if a baby dies very quickly, they don't count it as a maternal mortality.
You literally tried to talk about two things, birth counts and maternal mortality, which I don't even know why you brought up birth counts to begin with. You started saying some births don't count as births in European countries and then suddenly say if a baby dies quickly, it doesn't count as a maternal mortality. The actual fuck are you high on? Maternal mortality and counting births literally are two different things. Okay, whatever. Either Ben misspoke or he's actually that dumb. So instead, let's just look at the actual definitions on what maternity death means. Okay, so it's important to note that first of all the statistics is generated by the World Health Organization, which by the way uses the same definition as the CDC. They're the ones collecting data in countries around the world, which by the way includes European countries, and it's all under the same definition. Deaths that occur because of pregnancy or childbirth related complications during pregnancy or within 6 weeks after pregnancy ends. Under the same definition, the CDC released data that shows that indeed out of all the developed nations of the world, the US is leading by a large margin when it comes to maternity mortality, almost 3 times more than the next country, France. Of course, the United States isn't the only country in the world where maternity mortality is rising. However, the statistic is not wrong because we're the only developed nation or high-income country in which it is rising. This is not because of a difference in counting methods. We're all doing it under the same umbrella as defined by the WHO.
And then they suggest, quote, This danger will only worsen in a post-Roe versus Wade America. Yes, unless you forcibly abort or have many, many, many abortions all throughout American society.
No one is, quote, forcibly aborting. Abortion is something that can come in many different angles and usually involves a lot of consideration. But this article is only talking about abortion as it relates to healthcare, because there are plenty of complications when it comes to pregnancy, that medical conditions require an abortion to be done. When the doctor determines that an abortion is needed, not forcibly by the way, as it is a medical procedure to save the mother's life, then that important life-saving procedure can be denied due to increasing restrictions on abortion. Republicans, of course, will always say that saving the mother's life is an exception to the laws, but as I've discussed in previous videos, that is usually not the case, due to lawmakers being the ones to determine the outcome of medical conditions, and abortions are denied anyway. I go into more detail in that video, so please check it out.
The maternal mortality rate in states that have banned abortion is up to 3 times higher than in states that support abortion acts. Now, the reason for that is not because abortion is, quote unquote, saving lives. The reason for that is actually in the prior slide. It says the crisis is even starker for Black Americans, whose maternal mortality rate is nearly 3 times that of white Americans. That's been blamed on American racism. It really has more to do with underlying causes. If you look at Europe, Europe has exactly the same sort of disparity between Black maternal mortality and non-Black maternal mortality.
Really? What's the underlying cause then? You never go into detail. What could possibly cause Black people to die more of pregnancy-related complications than white people? Please explain it to me. Are you going to go into the biology? Are Black people's reproductive biology just different when it comes to reproduction? Like, you just say underlying causes without following up. Well, since you're not going to answer it, I will. It's because of oppression, which stems from racism, which results in Black individuals having worse access to healthcare, which causes them to die more due to not being able to access that healthcare that they need. Also, going back to that point where maternity deaths are higher in states where abortion is more restricted than not, you literally just skipped over that point for whatever reason, I guess because you don't have a proper response to it. Wonderful.
Okay, this op-ed continues. Anti-abortion advocates argue that an embryo should be accorded all the rights of a human being. If one accepts this argument, given the deadly risks, does a pregnant person not have a right to self-defense against someone threatening their safety? Okay, here's where this thing goes wildly off the rails. Okay, so we'll continue the argument, and then I'll explain how stupid this is. Quote, U.S. culture has long accepted self-defense as a valid reason to use deadly force. And then it shows a bunch of presumed Republicans who are carrying guns. Fetishized it even. And then it says, imagine if a person seeking an abortion were treated like a cop who had killed someone. Quote, I feared for my safety. It shows a woman holding her belly saying, I feared for my safety. And then everybody else says to this woman, it's okay. You were just defending yourself. You did what you had to do. Your life matters. And one of the people defending this woman is, of course, a person wearing a cross. So the basic idea here is that we should treat unborn fetuses like criminals.
Okay, no one say they should be treated like criminals, but before you make your dumb argument, let me get my opinion out there. When it comes to self-defense, I personally don't actually use this argument because I do think it's a bit of a stretch. Now, if Republicans tried to pass a law that does not allow an abortion even at the expense of a mother's life, then you can make this argument. Because if a fetus is going to kill the mother, then that's obvious self-defense if you abort. However, this argument does make sense in a general sense because you usually don't always know how a pregnancy would affect your health. Specifically, some complications can come at a later time and you wouldn't know it at the moment. So given that, if there was something that's a threat to you that you don't know what it's going to do to you later, including possibly killing you, then that threat alone is enough of a reason for self-defense. And I'm just arguing from a Republican standpoint of self-defense here, not that I necessarily agree with it, but imagine if someone broke into your house in the middle of the night and you have a gun with you. Surely you agree that if you shot this person, you could argue self-defense, that this person was posing a threat to you. But even so, you didn't know what this person would have done. Was he going to murder you? Was he going to hurt you? Or was he just going to leave after being spotted? You didn't know at the moment, but the threat of him hurting or murdering you being a possibility alone is enough to argue self-defense, correct? So why wouldn't it be the same case for pregnancy, where the possibility of the fetus hurting you is justification enough of self-defense? Of course, at the end of the day, I don't actually use this argument myself because I think self-defense in general and stand your ground laws in the US is dumb, but it works here when arguing against conservatives because it's turning their own logic against them. Plus, I do think there is a nuance because in pregnancy we usually monitor progress very closely, so we would know when the criminal decides to make a move to try to take the homeowner's life. Either way, I see the intention behind the article, I just personally wouldn't use that argument.
Now, I noticed a difference. Criminals threaten police officers on the regular, which is why police officers have to shoot them. Again, I will mention that stat. Out of every for every 3,040 live births in the United States, there's one case of maternity-related death. For every 3,040 live births.
Yep, we heard you the first time, but 1 out of 3,000 is still one too many. Anyway, criminals threaten police officers, just like how a fetus is by the same definition threatening the mother's life. You could be healthy all you want and pregnancy can still kill you, just like how it can kill anyone.
So, the suggestion by this op-ed writer is that every woman should be able to kill her baby at any time without presenting any evidence that the baby was a threat to her, because 1 out of every 3,040 live births may end in maternal mortality.
You clearly don't know the risks of pregnancy if you're talking like that. Again, you could be the healthiest person in the world and still die from pregnancy or birth just because that's the way it is, because being pregnant itself is already a risk women have to take.
So the actual argument that this moron is making is that if police officers in every single traffic stop just shot the person they were stopping, because whether they're a risk or not, that would be perfectly okay with the American public.
No, stopping a person for a traffic violation is not a great enough risk, but being pregnant absolutely is. But this is also why I hate stand your ground laws, because it's never clear where you draw that line. Obviously, every random person on the street has a tiny bit of risk. Although unlikely, it's a non-zero chance that anyone could technically pull out a gun and start shooting people. Pregnancy being one of the most dangerous medical things that could happen to a woman is obviously higher on that scale of risk. So the question then becomes, where do we draw that line? Obviously, someone stopped for a traffic violation, we can agree the risk is too low to argue self-defense, but the argument in the article is saying that the risk of pregnancy itself is great enough under your own logic, and the fact that women die more of pregnancy-related complications than police officers in the line of duty is arguing that the risk is greater than even the risk of criminals threatening and shooting at police officers. So Ben, you missed the point here, and you responding to each individual section of the article instead of it as a whole has strayed you away from the actual argument. Of course, again, I have to emphasize, I don't personally like the self-defense argument because one point that isn't made clear is that the nuance in pregnancy exists, where at different stages you have different risks, and usually risks can become apparent before it becomes a greater threat. So the level of risk varies greatly throughout the process. So anyway, thanks for watching. As you're watching this, I'm probably on vacation somewhere, but I'll be back before you know it. Thank you to Fireshard, Alan Morton, Miss Fixit, Rick Klenn, and Bomanium for their generous support on Patreon, and I'll see you in the next one.